Hello there. Welcome to Drifting Off Learning Channel. You have found your way here, and that is all you needed to do tonight. There is nothing else required of you now. No decisions to make, no places to be, no tasks left unfinished that cannot wait until tomorrow. The only thing that matters right now is the slow, gentle weight of your body settling into wherever you are resting, and the quiet permission you are giving yourself to let this day dissolve softly, like mist over still water in the early hours before dawn. Take a slow breath in and let it go without any hurry. Let your shoulders drift downward just a little. Let your hands open and become still. There is no need to hold on to anything right now. Not a thought, not a worry, not even the sound of these words particularly. They are simply here, moving gently around you like a soft current of air, and you are free to follow them wherever they lead, or to drift away entirely whenever sleep decides to come and take you. Tonight, we are going to travel somewhere deeply still and ancient. We are going to let our awareness move downward, slowly and peacefully, beneath the surface of the ordinary world, into the quiet underground realms that exist beneath every road, every field, every forest, every sleeping city on this earth. These are worlds that very few people ever see, and yet they are always there, humming along in their patient, unhurried way, completely undisturbed by the busyness of the surface. They have been there for millions of years, in many cases, and they will continue long after everything that concerns us today has become part of the geological record. There is something deeply comforting about that thought, if you let yourself sit with it gently. The underground world does not hurry. It does not concern itself with schedules or interruptions. It moves according to the slow rhythms of water and pressure and time, rhythms that are so vast and so gradual that the difference between a decade and a century is almost imperceptible down there in the dark. And if you are enjoying this kind of gentle, drifting companionship tonight, and you would like to find your way back here on other evenings, there is a quiet little invitation resting here for you. No pressure at all, simply a soft suggestion that you might consider subscribing or leaving a gentle like somewhere along the way, so that this channel remains easy for you to find whenever rest feels far away. But that is entirely in your own time, and entirely your own choice. And right now, the only choice that matters is the one you have already made, which is to be here, to be still, and to let the world below carry you gently towards sleep. So let us begin, very slowly, by imagining the ground beneath us. Not the floor beneath your bed, or the earth beneath your home exactly, but the idea of ground, the concept of it, that vast, layered world that begins just a few inches below the surface of any soil and extends downward for miles and miles and miles, in layers of increasing age and silence and pressure and mystery. Right now, as you lie here, that world is directly beneath you, doing what it has always done, holding everything up, quietly, without effort, without acknowledgement, simply present and steady in the way that only very old things can be. The very first layer you would encounter, if you could shrink yourself down and slip between the grains of soil just below the surface, is perhaps the most alive of all the underground layers. This is the topsoil zone, and it is an extraordinarily busy place, though busy in a quiet, miniature way that has nothing to do with noise or speed. Within a single handful of healthy topsoil, there are more living organisms than there are human beings on the entire surface of the planet. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, springtails, mites, and countless other tiny creatures all going about their small and essential lives, in the spaces between grains of sand and clay and decomposed organic matter. They breathe, they eat, they move, they transform the dead material of last year's leaves into the nutrients that next year's roots will find and drink. And they do all of this in absolute silence, in near total darkness, in spaces so small that a human hair would seem like a massive tunnel to most of them. And what is extraordinary to sit with, quietly, is that this process has been going on without interruption for hundreds of millions of years. Long before there were forests, long before there were flowering plants, long before there were insects on the surface, there were already microorganisms in the soil, doing essentially what they do today, breaking things down, passing energy from one form into another, making the world habitable for the creatures that would eventually come. The soil beneath us is not just dirt, it is memory. It is accumulated time, compressed and layered and alive. A little further down, the soil transitions into what scientists sometimes call the subsoil layer, where the density increases, where the roots of larger plants still reach, but where the variety of life begins to thin and quiet. The colors change down here too. The rich, dark browns and near blacks of the organic upper layer give way to paler tones, ochres and rusty reds and dusty grays and yellows. The colors of mineral rock beginning to make itself more present in the composition of what surrounds you. The world down here is quieter. The temperature is more constant. The dramatic swings of heat and cold that the surface experiences with every season and every passing cloud barely register here. There is a stillness to subsoil that is like the stillness of a room that has been undisturbed for a very long time. Roots from very large trees can extend down into this zone and beyond. An old oak tree, for instance, which might have branches spreading 30 or 40 feet across the sky, can have a root system that reaches almost as far in all directions beneath the ground as it stretches above it. And those roots are not simply drinking straws passively pulling water upward. They are continuously growing, millimeter by patient millimeter, feeling their way through the soil, sensing pressure and moisture and chemical gradients, responding to the conditions they encounter with slow and subtle intelligence. A root that meets a stone will simply curve around it, given enough time. A root that finds an underground water source will grow toward it with the unhurried determination of something that has nowhere else to be and all the time in the world to arrive. There is something about the patience of roots that feels deeply restful to contemplate. They do not worry about whether they are growing fast enough. They do not stop and reconsider. They simply grow, one tiny cell division at a time, finding their way through the darkness with a kind of quiet confidence that is very beautiful. Beneath the subsoil, you begin to encounter bedrock, or what geologists call the parent material layer, the solid rock from which the soil above was originally derived over thousands and millions of years of weathering and fracture and biological activity. And this rock is where things begin to get very old indeed. The bedrock beneath your feet right now, wherever you happen to be in the world, might be 100 million years old, or 200 million or more. It was formed during periods of Earth's history that are almost impossible to hold in the mind. Times when the continents were in entirely different positions, when the oceans covered land that is now mountain, when creatures that no longer exist lived and moved and died, and their bodies became part of the sediment that became part of this rock. And yet the rock simply sits there, holding everything above it up, patient beyond any patience we can imagine. It does not know how old it is. It does not feel the weight of its own history. It is simply rock, solid and dark and cool, and in its solidity there is something that, if you let yourself feel it tonight, is actually quite comforting. The ground beneath you is not going anywhere. It is older than anything you have ever encountered, and it will remain long after everything that concerns you has transformed into something else. There is great safety in that kind of permanence, if you can let yourself rest against it. Within that bedrock, wherever there are layers of soluble rock, limestone most commonly, or dolomite, or gypsum, water has been doing something remarkable over very long periods of time. Rainwater falls on the surface and absorbs a small amount of carbon dioxide as it moves through the soil, becoming very slightly acidic. And then that mildly acidic water seeps down through tiny cracks in the limestone, and very slowly, grain by grain, molecule by molecule, dissolves the rock it passes through. This process takes enormous amounts of time. The enlargement of a crack by a single centimeter might require 10,000 years of continuous water flow. And yet, given enough time, which the underground world always has, those tiny cracks become passages, and those passages become chambers, and those chambers become the vast and cathedral-like cave systems that exist beneath the surface of limestone landscapes all over the world. There are cave systems on this earth that are almost incomprehensibly large. The Mammoth Cave system in the state of Kentucky, in the United States of America, has been mapped to a length of more than 400 miles of passages, making it the longest known cave system in the world. And yet geologists believe that much of it remains undiscovered and unmapped. 400 miles of tunnels and chambers and underground rivers and lakes, all carved out by water and time beneath the green hills of a quiet rural landscape. Most of it in absolute darkness, most of it in a silence so complete that it registers as a kind of presence rather than an absence. Imagine standing in one of those deep chambers, far from any entrance, far from any surface sound. The silence there is not the ordinary silence of a quiet room at night. It is a geological silence, a silence that has existed in that particular space for millions of years, a silence that predates every human voice and every human language and every human thought about silence. It has weight to it, and depth, and when people who have been into such places describe what it felt like to be there, they often speak of a profound calm, a sense of having stepped entirely outside of time, of feeling both very small and very safe, cradled within the earth itself. The formations that grow inside caves are among the most patient and beautiful things in the natural world. Stalactites form on cave ceilings when water-rich in dissolved calcium carbonate seeps slowly through the rock above and hangs, drip by drip, from the same point on the ceiling, depositing a tiny ring of mineral with each drop that falls. These formations grow at rates that vary enormously depending on the chemistry and flow rate of the water, but on average, a stalactite might add about a centimeter of length every 100 years or so. Some of the largest stalactites found in caves are tens of feet long, which means they have been growing continuously for hundreds of thousands of years. Patient beyond all patience, adding their tiny mineral increments in the dark without any audience, without any purpose beyond the quiet logic of water and chemistry and time. Stalagmites grow upward from the cave floor, formed from the same dripping water, built from the minerals that the falling drops deposit at the point of impact, building upward grain by grain, year by year, century by century. Sometimes a stalactite and a stalagmite growing toward each other from ceiling and floor over thousands of years, will eventually meet and merge into a single column, a joining that took perhaps 100,000 years to complete. And when they do, nothing announces it. There is no sound, no ceremony. The cave simply contains now a column that was not there before, and the darkness continues, and the water continues its slow dripping somewhere else, and time goes on in the way that time underground always goes on, which is to say with infinite and unhurried patience. Some caves contain formations of a different kind, structures called cave pearls, which form when water drips into a shallow pool on the cave floor and rotates tiny grains of mineral sediment as the water moves, coating them with layer after layer of calcium carbonate, the way a pearl is coated inside an oyster. Cave pearls are often perfectly round or oval, smooth and lustrous, and they can be found resting in their shallow stone pools in the dark like small patient jewels, growing imperceptibly with each decade, rolled gently by the water into their smooth shapes over thousands of years, never seen by any eye, never touched by any hand, simply existing in their perfect, quiet beauty in the dark. There are also formations called cave flowers, or anthodites, which are crystals of aragonite or gypsum that grow in curved and branching shapes, extending outward from cave walls in white and translucent petals, as delicate-looking as real flowers, but composed entirely of mineral crystal, and growing with the slowness of geological time. Some of these formations are extraordinarily fragile. A single breath of warm air from a human visitor can alter the humidity of a cave microenvironment enough to affect the growth of crystals that have been slowly building their structure for 50,000 years. And so, the most remarkable cave formations are now protected, kept behind barriers or accessible only to scientists, because the patience that created them is so vast and so irreversible that it demands a kind of reverence. In Mexico, deep within the Naica mine complex in the state of Chihuahua, there exists a chamber that was discovered by miners in the year 2000, a place that had been sealed off from the surface world for perhaps 500,000 years, filled with hot, mineral-rich groundwater that had been slowly depositing its dissolved minerals onto the chamber walls and floor throughout all of that time. When the miners broke through into it, they found themselves looking at a space that seemed almost unreal, a room the size of several tennis courts, filled floor to ceiling with enormous selenite crystals, some of them larger than 30 feet in length and 4 feet in diameter, shaped like enormous sword blades or pillars of clouded glass, translucent white and glowing faintly in the light of the miners' lamps. They are the largest natural crystals ever found on Earth, and they grew in absolute darkness, in water heated to over 50 degrees Celsius by the geothermal heat of the Earth below, over 500,000 years of uninterrupted mineral deposition. Never seen, never imagined, simply growing because the conditions were present and the time was available. It is difficult to hold that kind of scale in the mind, which is perhaps why it feels restful rather than overwhelming. The way that very large and very old things often do when you simply let them exist alongside your awareness, rather than trying to fully comprehend them. The crystals are there, in the dark beneath that Mexican desert, enormous and patient and unchanged, growing still, very slowly, filling their ancient sealed chamber with their quiet mineral lives, and knowing nothing of the sleeping world above. Underground rivers are another kind of stillness altogether, and yet they move, which gives them a quality that is different from the silence of crystals or the darkness of empty chambers. They have been described by the rare people who have traveled them in small boats as among the most otherworldly experiences available on this earth. An underground river flows through passages carved by its own patient erosion, sometimes through tunnels so low that a boat must proceed in near darkness with the ceiling only inches above, and sometimes bursting into enormous chambers where the ceiling vaults upward into a darkness that a headlamp cannot reach, where the water spreads into a wide black lake, and the sound of the river becomes a soft, reverberant whisper, filling the space from all directions. The Puerto Princesa subterranean river on the island of Palawan in the Philippines is among the most famous in the world, flowing for more than 5 miles through a cave system beneath a limestone mountain range before emerging directly into the South China Sea. Boats take visitors through the first portion of its passable length, and those who have made the journey describe the experience in tones that sound very much like dreams. The darkness, the cool air, the movement of the water carrying you forward without effort, the enormous chambers opening and closing around you, the sounds of the cave, drips and echoes, and the soft lapping of water against the boat, filling the air with a continuous gentle music that has no melody, but creates a feeling of deep presence and peace. The cave contains its own ecosystem, with cave swiftlets nesting on the walls and bats roosting in their thousands on the ceiling, and the river carries its own fish and crustaceans, adapted over thousands of generations to life in the permanent dark. The creatures that live in permanent underground darkness are among the most quietly remarkable on Earth, and thinking about them tonight carries a certain gentle strangeness, the way that thinking about the deep sea does, a sense of the world being much larger and more varied and more patient than daily life usually reminds us. These animals are called troglobites, a word that comes from the Greek for cave dweller, and they have evolved over many generations of life in the dark into forms that their surface-dwelling ancestors would not recognize. Cave fish, for example, which have descended from surface fish that found their way into underground water systems and became trapped there over geological timescales, have in many cases lost their eyes entirely, not through damage but through evolution, through the simple fact that eyes are metabolically expensive to grow and maintain, and in total darkness they provide no advantage whatsoever. Over thousands of generations, fish with slightly less developed eyes were no more disadvantaged than those with full vision, and eventually the genetic investment in eyes was redirected elsewhere. Many cave fish have also lost their pigmentation, becoming pale or translucent, their internal organs visible through their skin in the light of a researcher's torch, because pigmentation too is energetically costly and provides no benefit in the dark. They navigate instead by an enhanced lateral line system, a set of pressure-sensitive cells running along their sides that detect minute changes in water movement, allowing them to sense the presence of walls and obstacles and prey with extraordinary precision. There is something gently melancholy about cave fish, and yet also something serene. They have found their world. They are perfectly adapted to it. The darkness that would be terrifying and disorienting to a surface creature is simply home to them, the only environment their bodies and nervous systems have ever known, and they move through it with the calm efficiency of any creature perfectly suited to its environment. They are not waiting for light. They are not missing anything. They are simply being exactly what they are, in exactly the world they inhabit, with a completeness that is actually quite peaceful to contemplate. Cave salamanders, found in the deep limestone cave systems of Slovenia and Croatia and Bosnia, are among the most extraordinary examples of underground adaptation. These pale, almost translucent creatures, which look something like small, elongated salamanders with feathery external gills still visible on their necks, live their entire lives in underground streams and pools in conditions of complete darkness and near constant temperature. They can survive for years without eating, slowing their metabolism to a rate that would be impossible for their surface-dwelling relatives. They are extraordinarily long-lived, with some individuals believed to reach 100 years of age, though this is very difficult to verify because so little is known about their lives in the inaccessible caves they inhabit. They reproduce rarely and slowly, and their eggs, when laid, take months to hatch. Time moves differently for them than it does for most creatures, and the cold, dark water of the cave maintains them in a state of quiet metabolic patience that seems almost like a natural form of meditation. In the deep limestone caves of Texas and other parts of the American Southwest, enormous colonies of Mexican free-tailed bats make their roosts in the dark upper chambers, sometimes in numbers that are almost impossible to imagine. A single cave near the town of Bracken in Texas contains a colony estimated at several million individuals, the largest known concentration of mammals in any single location on Earth. During the day, they hang in the dark together, packed so tightly on the cave ceiling that they form what looks like a living, breathing, rustling carpet of warm fur and folded wings, and in the early evening, they emerge in a stream that can take several hours to pass. A river of bats flowing out of the cave entrance in a continuous ribbon that spirals upward into the dusk sky and disperses across the landscape in search of insects. And then, in the early hours before dawn, that stream reverses, and millions of small warm bodies return to the cave, each one finding its precise place in the darkness by sound and smell and memory, folding its wings and hanging upside down and becoming still. And the cave quiets again, and the darkness settles, and another day begins underground in the way that all days underground begin, which is to say, imperceptibly, without the light changing, without any announcement, simply as the continuation of the quiet that has always been there. The soil and cave worlds are remarkable, but there is another underground realm that is perhaps even more quietly astonishing, one that is invisible to every instrument except the most careful scientific examination, and that is the world of fungal networks beneath the forest floor. Every forest, and many other plant communities, exists in intimate partnership with a vast web of fungal threads called mycelium, which extends through the soil in almost incomprehensible density and complexity, weaving between and around the roots of trees and other plants and connecting them in a network of chemical communication and nutrient exchange that ecologists have come to call, with some reverence, the Wood Wide Web. The mycelium of a single fungal colony can extend for miles through the soil, with threads so fine that a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil might contain several miles of fungal filaments, if you could somehow unravel and lay them end to end. These threads, called hyphae, are typically only a few micrometers in diameter, which is to say far thinner than the finest human hair, and they grow through the spaces between soil particles with a gentle, exploratory persistence, secreting enzymes that break down organic matter and absorbing the nutrients that result. They are extraordinarily sensitive to their chemical environment, responding to gradients of moisture and dissolved compounds by growing toward favorable conditions and away from unfavorable ones, always slowly, always quietly, always in the dark. Where fungal hyphae meet plant roots, something remarkable can happen. The hyphae can form an intimate association with the root cells, wrapping around them or even penetrating them gently without causing harm. And in this union, called mycorrhiza, a partnership is established that benefits both parties. The fungus gains access to the sugars that the plant produces through photosynthesis, sugars that the fungus cannot make for itself because it lives in the dark and cannot harness light. And the plant gains access to the much wider foraging network of the fungal mycelium, which can explore soil volumes many times larger than the roots alone could reach, and which is particularly good at acquiring phosphorus and other minerals from the mineral particles of the soil. But the network does more than this, and it is here that the underground world of fungi reveals its most quietly extraordinary character. Through the mycelial web connecting different trees, substances can move between individuals that are not directly in contact with each other at all. Sugars produced by a large, well-lit tree can travel through the fungal network and appear at the roots of a smaller tree growing in shade, which lacks the light to produce enough sugar for itself. Carbon and nitrogen and other essential elements can be redistributed through the network according to a logic that is not yet fully understood, but that seems to favor the health and balance of the community as a whole. Chemical signals that a tree produces when it is under attack from insects or disease can travel through the mycelial network to neighboring trees, which then begin producing their own defensive compounds before the attack has reached them. A form of slow chemical communication passing through the living dark beneath the forest floor. This is happening right now, beneath every forest and woodland that exists, in silence and in darkness as you rest. The trees above are asleep in their own way, their metabolisms slowed by the night and the season, but beneath them the fungal networks continue their quiet work, shuttling molecules between roots, maintaining the connections, doing the invisible structural work that keeps the forest community alive and connected. It is a form of community that has no voice, no movement that the eye could perceive, no drama, nothing that would draw attention to itself, simply a vast and patient living web, doing what it has done for hundreds of millions of years, in the dark beneath our feet, as we go about the business of our surface lives without any knowledge of it at all. And there is something in that idea that feels like a kind of comfort, if you let it settle in gently tonight. The world is not only what we can see. Beneath the visible surface, there are these vast and patient living systems doing their quiet essential work, connected and cooperative in ways that do not require anyone to observe them, or acknowledge them, or understand them. They simply are. They simply do what they do, in the dark and the silence, and the world above is sustained by their invisible patient labor in the way that a person is sustained by their own heartbeat, which continues its steady work without ever being asked. Earthworms occupy a particular place in the underground world that is worth dwelling on gently for a moment, because they are perhaps the most familiar of underground creatures, and yet their work is among the most quietly transformative of any creature on Earth. Charles Darwin, who spent much of his life studying them, wrote his last major scientific book about earthworms, and in it he estimated that a single acre of English farmland might contain more than 50,000 earthworms, all of them continuously moving through the soil, eating organic matter and mineral particles, mixing and aerating and restructuring the ground through which they pass. In a single year, the earthworms of a typical pasture can move many tons of soil, bringing deeper material to the surface and pulling surface material down, turning the soil in a slow and continuous agricultural process that has been going on since the Carboniferous period, long before any human farmer ever turned the first furrow. Earthworms do not see. They have no eyes at all, only specialized cells in their skin that detect light and move them away from it. They navigate entirely by touch and chemical sensing, feeling their way through the soil, responding to moisture and organic content and vibration, living in the perpetual dark with a simplicity and completeness that is somehow very peaceful to think about. They are entirely present in their environment in a way that more complex creatures rarely manage. There is no part of an earthworm's experience that is divided between where it is and where it would rather be. It simply is where it is, doing what it does, moving through the dark soil with the unhurried purpose of something that has no concept of an alternative. The underground world also contains, in many parts of the world, vast systems of animal-made tunnels and chambers that have been constructed with extraordinary diligence and over very long periods of time. Prairie dog towns in North America can extend beneath the surface for many acres, with main tunnels descending several feet and then branching into networks of side passages and chambers, each chamber with a specific function. Sleeping chambers lined with dry grass, nursery chambers for the young, food storage rooms, listening posts near the surface where sentinels can detect vibrations from approaching predators. These communities can contain hundreds of individuals, all sharing the underground infrastructure that their colony has built and maintained across many generations, each animal knowing its role in the network, the whole functioning as a kind of distributed city with its own social structure and communication system and collective memory of where things are and how things work. Naked mole rats, which are extraordinary creatures living in the arid underground of East Africa, construct similarly complex burrow systems and maintain them with a social organization that is unique among mammals, a eusocial system more like that of ants or bees than like anything seen elsewhere among warm-blooded animals. A naked mole rat colony has a single breeding queen and a large number of workers who maintain the burrows, find food, care for the young, and defend the colony. They are almost entirely blind, their small eyes detecting little more than light and dark, and they live in a permanent darkness and warmth that maintains their body temperature without the need for their own metabolic heat generation, since they are, uniquely among mammals, essentially cold-blooded. They communicate through a repertoire of soft vocalizations, chirps and grunts and quiet sounds that travel through the tunnels to coordinate the activity of the colony, and they can live for extraordinarily long times, some individuals reaching 30 years of age, which is many times longer than a surface-dwelling rodent of similar size could expect to survive. Their underground world has given them a slowness and a longevity that is remarkable, as if the dark and the stillness have extended their lives by removing them from the accelerated world of surface existence. Ants create underground worlds of staggering complexity and scale, and no accounting of the underground realm would be quite complete without resting for a moment in the quiet awareness of what exists beneath an active ant colony. The leafcutter ants of tropical South America construct subterranean cities that can descend 20 feet or more below the surface and contain hundreds of separate chambers connected by a network of precisely engineered tunnels. The largest chambers are devoted to growing the fungal gardens that are the colony's primary food source, vast rooms in which the ants cultivate a particular species of fungus on beds of leaf fragments that worker ants have carried down from the surface, chewing them into a pulp of exactly the right consistency to support fungal growth. These fungal gardens are maintained with extraordinary care, the ants constantly weeding out competing fungi, adding new material, removing old material, adjusting the temperature and humidity of the chamber through ventilation systems of surprising sophistication, opening and closing certain tunnels to regulate the airflow through the colony, the way a gardener might open and close windows in a greenhouse. The ventilation engineering of large ant colonies is something that architects and engineers have studied with genuine interest. The arrangement of tunnels and chambers creates passive airflow through the colony, driven by temperature differentials, and the metabolic heat generated by the ants and their fungal gardens, moving fresh air through the inhabited spaces and directing stale carbon dioxide outward through specific exit tunnels. This engineering is not consciously designed by any individual ant. It emerges from the collective behavior of millions of individuals, each following simple local rules, and the result is a structure of greater complexity and functionality than any single ant could conceive. Beneath our cities and roads and buildings, there is also an underground world of human creation that stretches back through history in a way that is quietly fascinating to think about at the end of a long day. The oldest known human underground constructions are cave dwellings and burial sites that date back tens of thousands of years, places where our distant ancestors sheltered and placed their dead and left paintings on the walls in firelight. Images that have now survived in the dark for 30,000 years or more, outlasting every other artifact of those ancient cultures by the simple virtue of having been kept in the constant conditions of underground space, away from weather and light, and the transforming effects of surface time. The ancient city of Derinkuyu in central Turkey, in the region of Cappadocia, contains what is perhaps the most remarkable surviving example of ancient human underground construction. A subterranean city carved from the soft volcanic rock of the Anatolian Plateau that extends at least 8 levels deep beneath the surface, with space for perhaps 20,000 people to shelter there along with their animals and food stores and water supply. It was carved, scholars believe, over several centuries, beginning perhaps 3,000 years ago, expanded and refined by successive inhabitants who needed protection from surface threats. The tunnels and chambers were ventilated by a system of deep shafts that still function today, bringing fresh air down through narrow stone chimneys to the living spaces below. Rolling stone doors, disc-shaped and fitted into grooves cut into the rock floor, could be moved from the inside to seal tunnels against intruders. Stables, wineries, oil presses, churches, schools, and communal spaces were all carved into the rock at various levels, connected by staircases and passages, forming a complete community of stone silent rooms in the dark beneath the surface. What must it have been like to walk down into that world and to live there for a season, in the constant cool and quiet of the rock, with the soft light of oil lamps and torches playing across carved stone walls, and the surface world with its weather and its dangers somewhere far above, separated from you by layers of solid rock that absorbed all sounds and all temperatures, and maintained the underground in its patient evenness. There is a quality of safety in that image that is worth resting in tonight, the feeling of being held by stone, of being beneath the reach of weather and wind, of existing in a space that the surface world cannot easily touch. The Romans built extensively underground, and the remnants of their subterranean world persist beneath many modern European cities, layered under the streets in the form of sewers and aqueduct channels and catacombs and foundations and storage rooms and the foundations of buildings long since vanished from the surface. Beneath the streets of Rome itself, the layers of human construction extend downward through the centuries, like a geological record of the city's own history. each era of building having been constructed on and through and around the evidence of earlier eras, so that to dig anywhere in the center of Rome is to move backward through time, encountering the remains of the medieval period, and then the early Christian period, and then the late Roman Empire, and then the Republic, and then, sometimes, even deeper, the remnants of cultures that the Romans themselves had already buried under their own constructions. The underground of Rome is a kind of library of time, dark and quiet and enormously deep. The Paris catacombs hold the bones of approximately 6 million people, transferred from overcrowded surface cemeteries during the late 18th century into the vast network of stone quarry tunnels that underlies the southern part of the city. These tunnels, excavated from the Lutetian limestone that underlies Paris for hundreds of years before the city's expansion, form a network of passages that extends for nearly 200 miles beneath the streets, most of them accessible only to urban explorers who navigate them without official permission, in darkness and silence broken only by the sound of dripping water and distant footsteps. In the portion designated as the official ossuary, the bones are arranged with a certain quiet ceremony, femurs and skulls arranged in patterns along the tunnel walls, a vast and silent record of millions of lives that ended on the surface centuries ago, and found their rest in the cool and quiet dark below. There is nothing frightening about this, really, if you think about it softly in the way that the underground invites you to think about everything, which is slowly and without urgency. The bones are simply matter, transformed from living tissue into mineral structure by the patient chemistry of time. The same process that transforms limestone into caves and minerals into crystals. The same patient work of dissolution and rearrangement that underlies everything that happens underground. They rest in the dark in their millions, the quiet remains of millions of ordinary lives, and the stone holds them safely, and the darkness is the same darkness that existed in those tunnels before they were ever placed there, and will exist long after the structures above them have also joined the geological record. Underground water is perhaps the most quietly important of all the underground worlds, and it moves through the earth in ways that are both very old and very present in the lives of every person alive. About 97% of all the fresh water on Earth that is not locked in glaciers or polar ice exists as groundwater, stored in the porous rock formations and sediment layers beneath the surface that hydrologists call aquifers. An aquifer is essentially a zone of saturated rock or sediment through which water moves, very slowly in most cases, filling the tiny spaces between mineral grains and flowing downhill through the landscape in a subsurface journey that might take decades or centuries to complete. The Ogallala Aquifer, which underlies parts of 8 states in the Great Plains of the United States, is one of the largest groundwater systems in the world, containing water that fell as rain and snow on the surface during the last ice age, 10,000 or more years ago, and filtered down through the soil and rock layers to fill the great underground reservoir that now provides water for farms and cities across an enormous region of the American interior. The water in the Ogallala is not being replenished quickly. It accumulated over 10,000 years of very gradual infiltration, and in some parts of the aquifer, it is being withdrawn at rates many times faster than it is being naturally replaced. The aquifer is, in a sense, ancient water that fell on a landscape that was very different from the one that exists today, water that filtered down through soils walked on by woolly mammoths and giant ground sloths, water that has been resting in the rock in the quiet dark for longer than recorded human history. To turn on a tap and receive that water, to drink it, is to reach back through 10,000 years of underground patience and draw something of that ancient stillness up into the surface world. There is something in that idea that is worth sitting with quietly, the way that all the best underground thoughts are worth sitting with, not analyzing or explaining, just allowing to rest in the mind with its full weight of time. Deep beneath the surface, in the spaces between rock grains and in the fractures of bedrock far below the level of any ordinary aquifer, microorganisms have been discovered that are living in conditions of almost total isolation from the surface world. These deep subsurface microbes, sometimes called intraterrestrials by the researchers who study them, exist at depths of a mile or more below the surface, in water that is extremely saline, in temperatures elevated by the geothermal heat of the Earth's interior, in chemical environments dominated by minerals rather than the organic compounds that fuel surface life. They are consuming hydrogen gas released by chemical reactions between water and certain iron-bearing minerals, a process called serpentinization, and using that energy to sustain themselves in what is essentially a complete absence of sunlight or any connection to the photosynthetic food web that powers almost all surface life. These organisms are thought to be among the slowest growing living things on Earth. Some of them may divide only once every 1,000 years or more, their metabolisms reduced to something so slow and minimal that it barely registers against the background chemistry of the rock that surrounds them. They have been there, doing this, in their patient and unhurried way, for millions of years, perhaps much longer, sustained by the chemistry of the deep earth in the dark and the heat and the pressure, without any awareness of the surface world above them, without any connection to the elaborate ecological webs of sunlight and photosynthesis and predation and growth that characterize life on the surface. The total mass of this deep underground microbial life may be comparable to or even greater than the total mass of all surface life on Earth, though these estimates carry significant uncertainty. What is not uncertain is that there is an entire biosphere beneath the surface biosphere, one that operates by completely different rules and at completely different speeds, one that has existed continuously for geological timescales and will continue to exist in its patient, invisible way, regardless of what happens on the surface above. The underground world is not secondary to the surface world. It is, in many ways, the foundation and the context within which the surface world operates, the deep and patient substrate that holds everything up and provides the chemical cycling and geological stability that surface life depends upon. There is something about thinking of all this life in the deep rock, those microscopic beings pursuing their impossibly slow existences in the dark and heat of the Earth's interior, that creates a feeling of both smallness and safety, the way that looking at a very large and very old thing always tends to do. The Earth is full of life in places we would never think to look, doing things that require instruments of extraordinary sensitivity to detect, living according to timescales that make the entirety of human history seem like an afternoon. And in the face of that kind of age and patience and vastness, the small concerns of a single day seem to settle and soften and become, perhaps, a little easier to release. The permafrost of the Arctic and subarctic regions represents another underground world of remarkable qualities, one that sits somewhere between the living and the geological, a layer of ground that has remained continuously frozen for thousands of years, preserving within itself a record of the past that is both fragile and extraordinarily detailed. In Siberia and northern Canada and Alaska, permafrost can extend hundreds of feet below the surface, and within its frozen grip it contains organic material that was alive 10,000 or 20,000 years ago. Roots and leaves and grasses and insects, and sometimes the larger remains of animals that have been sealed in the frozen dark since the last ice age. Mammoth remains have been found in Siberian permafrost in such good condition that the flesh was still present, red and identifiable as muscle tissue, preserved by the cold of the permafrost through 40,000 years in the dark. Seeds of ancient plants have been found in the frozen burrows of ground squirrels in Siberia, stored there by animals that died before the last glacial maximum, and researchers have grown flowering plants from some of these seeds, plants belonging to species that are otherwise extinct, reconstituted from genetic material that the permafrost kept intact through tens of thousands of years of cold, dark storage. The underground has a kind of memory that no other archive can match, a preservation through stillness and cold that maintains the detailed chemistry of living things long after the surface world has completely transformed around them. In the mountains of New Zealand, there is a cave system called the Waitomo Glowworm Caves, and within these limestone caves lives a creature whose existence seems almost too dreamlike to believe, a species of fungus gnat, whose larvae produce a soft, blue-green bioluminescence from their tiny bodies, adhering to the cave ceiling and hanging long, sticky threads below themselves to catch other insects attracted by the light. Thousands of these larvae can inhabit the ceiling of a single cave chamber, and from below, looking upward into the dark, the effect is that of looking up at a night sky full of stars. The cave ceiling glowing with thousands of tiny, cold blue-green points of light reflected in the still black water of the cave river below. The silence complete except for the very soft sound of flowing water somewhere in the dark, and the whole scene absolutely still. Visitors who have floated on boats through the glowworm chambers of Waitomo describe the experience in terms that belong more to dreams than to waking reality. The ceiling of living light, the silence, the cool, damp air, the slow passage of the boat through the dark water, guided by an invisible current. It requires no effort to imagine yourself there, at rest in a small boat, drifting slowly through the darkness beneath a ceiling of natural stars, the cold air soft against your face, the water carrying you gently forward, the sound of the world above completely absent, and the glow of 10,000 tiny lives above you, each one going about its quiet, luminescent business without any concern for what passes below. The whole scene suffused with a peace so complete and so ancient that it seems to belong to the very nature of underground things. Let yourself rest in that image for a moment, if it feels comfortable. The dark water, the soft starlight of tiny living things, the silence of deep rock on all sides, the feeling of being carried without effort, the temperature constant and cool and gentle. There is nowhere to go and nothing to do, and no sound from the surface world, and the boat drifts forward on the current in the dark, and the ceiling of light moves slowly past overhead, and time in the cave goes on in its own way, which is to say gently and without urgency, the way time goes everywhere underground. The geothermal systems of places like Iceland and Yellowstone in the United States give us another glimpse into the underground world's character, a world not of darkness and stillness, but of heat and movement, the Earth's interior making itself known through the surface in the form of hot springs and geysers and steam vents and boiling mud pools. Beneath Yellowstone, an enormous magma chamber sits only a few miles below the surface, heating the groundwater above it and driving one of the most active geothermal systems in the world. The geysers that Yellowstone is famous for, including the well-known Old Faithful, are powered by the geometry of underground plumbing systems, channels and chambers in the rock that fill with superheated water and then release it under pressure on a schedule determined by the size and shape of the underground reservoir, erupting in great columns of steam and water that are fed by the heat of the Earth's still molten interior and then subsiding and refilling and erupting again, on cycles that have been essentially constant for centuries. The water that erupts from a geyser has been underground for several hundred years on average. It fell on the surface as rain or snow centuries ago, slowly infiltrated into the ground, moved through the underground rock layers over decades and centuries, accumulated in the geothermal reservoir deep below, and finally made its dramatic return to the surface in the column of steam and hot water that visitors observe. The geyser is, in a sense, a kind of correspondence between centuries, between the rain that fell long ago and the surface that it is now rejoining after its long underground journey through heat and darkness and geological time. There is something about underground heat that is different in quality from surface heat. The geothermal warmth that comes from the Earth's interior is not the warmth of the sun, not a warmth that varies with the time of day or the season or the weather. It is a constant, patient heat that has been rising from the core of the Earth since the planet formed, a heat that comes from the slow decay of radioactive elements in the interior rock and from the residual heat of the Earth's formation billions of years ago. It will continue to rise for billions of years into the future, long after the sun has changed and the surface world has transformed beyond recognition. The underground warmth is as old and as constant as anything on Earth, and it rises through the rock in ways that are invisible to the surface, maintaining the temperatures that deep cave systems enjoy in their constant, season-immune stillness. In the deep ocean, which is in some ways the largest underground world on the planet, even though it is filled with water rather than air, there are hydrothermal vents on the seafloor that erupt superheated mineral-rich water from the Earth's interior directly into the cold of the deep ocean. And around these vents there exist entire ecosystems that depend not on sunlight, but on the chemical energy of the vent fluids. Ecosystems of tube worms and clams and crabs and shrimp and fish and enormous quantities of microbial life, all of it existing in the perpetual dark of the deep ocean floor, sustained by the chemistry of the Earth's interior rather than the light of the sun. These communities have been living around hydrothermal vents for hundreds of millions of years, and they demonstrate that life is not dependent on sunlight in the way that surface ecologists once assumed. Life goes where the energy is, and underground and deep ocean environments have been providing their own forms of chemical energy since long before photosynthesis evolved on the surface. There is something deeply reassuring about this kind of life that found a way to exist in the cold, dark deep of the ocean floor. Life that built its food webs around the chemistry of volcanic vents rather than the light of a distant star. Life that has been doing this in the dark and under enormous pressure for geological timescales, quietly, without any knowledge of the warm and sunlit world above. It is a reminder that existence finds its way, that life is more creative and more persistent, and more varied in its strategies than any single example of it might suggest, and that the dark places of the world are not empty or barren or hostile, but rather full of their own forms of patient, adapted, quietly extraordinary life. The cave systems of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico are particularly remarkable because they exist within the lens of freshwater, that floats on the salt water of the Caribbean beneath the flat limestone plain of the peninsula. These caves, called cenotes on the surface where their ceilings have collapsed to create circular pools open to the sky, connect underground into vast networks of water-filled passages that dive to depths of many hundreds of feet and extend for miles through the rock. And in these passages, wherever the freshwater layer meets the saltwater below, there exists a phenomenon called the halocline, a place where fresh and salt water mix imperfectly and create an optical distortion in the water that makes everything below the halocline look as if it is seen through a shimmering, refracting lens, like looking through the surface of a wavering pool at the sky, but upward rather than downward. Divers who have penetrated into these cenote cave systems describe floating through this halocline as one of the most otherworldly and beautiful experiences imaginable. The water above clear and blue, the water below shimmering and distorted as if a layer of moving silk has been stretched across the floor of the passage, and through the silk the deeper cave fades away into a blue darkness that goes on further than the light can follow. The Mayans who built their civilization on the Yucatan Peninsula understood the cenotes to be sacred places, portals to Xibalba, which was their name for the underworld, the place where the dead went and where certain gods resided, a place of darkness and water and mystery that was to be approached with reverence. They made offerings to the cenotes, throwing precious objects and sometimes making sacrifices into the pools, and they built their most important temples in close proximity to cenote systems, believing that the proximity to the underground world conferred spiritual power on the site. There is a long human tradition of understanding the underground as a place of deep significance, a place that is connected to the deepest layers of existence, to death and rebirth, and the roots of the world, to powers and presences that the surface world only partially reveals. And while the language and the specific beliefs vary enormously from culture to culture, the underlying intuition that the underground world is significant in some fundamental way, that it connects to something real and deep and enduring, seems to be universal. Beneath the city of Edinburgh in Scotland, there are underground streets and closes that were sealed off from the surface in the 17th century, when the city expanded upward and paved over the old buildings below rather than clearing them away, creating a level of intact historical architecture preserved in the dark beneath the modern city. These underground vaults, as they are known, were used for storage and housing and workshops in the centuries after they were enclosed, and then gradually abandoned as conditions in them deteriorated, and then forgotten for many generations, rediscovered only in the late 20th century, when explorations of the underground revealed the extent of what had been preserved in the dark. They now exist as a kind of frozen moment in the city's past, stone-walled rooms and passages that have been in continuous existence since the medieval period, their walls still bearing the marks of the people who worked and lived and died in them centuries ago, their air still and cool and carrying the faint mineral scent of very old stone. The underground world of London is similarly layered and historically complex, with the buried courses of rivers that once ran on the surface now flowing invisibly beneath the streets. The rivers Tyburn and Fleet, and Walbrook and several others, culverted and directed into underground brick channels during the city's expansion, now contributing their flows to the drainage system of the modern city, without any awareness on the part of the millions of surface inhabitants that these ancient rivers are still moving beneath their feet. The rivers did not stop when the buildings were built over them. They simply continued, in the dark and the quiet, following their old courses through the clay and rock of the London basin, doing what rivers have always done, moving downhill toward the sea, carrying the chemistry of their source areas through the underground world toward the Thames and the tidal estuary and the ocean beyond. There is something oddly touching about the buried rivers of London, something that invites a gentle kind of contemplation. They were here before the city. They will probably be here after it, in some form, finding their way through whatever remains of the underground infrastructure of the centuries, adapting to the conditions they find, following the gradients that physics and gravity impose on all moving water. The city built over them and forgot them, but they did not know they had been forgotten, and they did not stop. They simply continued, in the dark, being exactly what they have always been. The deepest mine shafts that humans have excavated go to remarkable depths, with the deepest gold mines in South Africa descending more than 2.5 miles below the surface. And in those depths, the rock temperature climbs above 50 degrees Celsius, heated by the geothermal gradient of the Earth's interior, so that elaborate refrigeration and ventilation systems are required to keep the temperatures at levels where human miners can work safely. At those depths, the pressure of the overlying rock is enormous, and the rock itself is under such stress that it occasionally fractures with explosive force in events called rock bursts, sudden releases of accumulated elastic energy in the rock that are functionally similar to small earthquakes triggered by the removal of the rock that was holding the stress in equilibrium. The underground at those depths is an active and dynamic place in ways that deep caves are not, responding to the mining activity with its own geological reactions, reminding the humans working there that the deep earth has its own physics and its own agenda, and that the removal of rock from those depths is an intervention in geological processes of great scale and complexity. But stepping back from the industrial underground, returning to the natural underground world, there is a quality of deep cave systems that deserves more attention, which is their relationship with sound. Underground chambers in certain configurations act as natural resonating spaces with acoustic properties that are sometimes extraordinary. The shape of a cave and the nature of its rock walls and floors affect the way sound moves within it, and some cave chambers produce reverberations of many seconds, so that a single spoken word or a single hand clap will continue to echo and re-echo within the space for several seconds after the sound was produced, the stone walls returning the sound wave multiple times from multiple surfaces, creating a wash of overlapping echoes that gradually fades. In some chambers, musical notes played or sung within the space take on a quality of fullness and resonance that is unlike anything achievable in a human-built acoustic space. There is evidence, examined carefully by archaeologists and acoustic researchers, that some of the cave systems in France and Spain where prehistoric humans painted their famous cave paintings, the caves of Lascaux and Chauvet and Altamira and others, were chosen in part for their acoustic properties, and that the images were painted most densely in areas where the acoustic resonance was most pronounced, suggesting that sound and music and perhaps ritual performance may have been part of the purpose of these underground galleries. The people who painted these extraordinary images 30,000 years ago may have chosen to do so in places where their voices and their music sounded most powerful, most resonant, most like the voice of the underground itself responding to them. They may have sat in these cave chambers in the flickering light of grease lamps and heard the stone return their songs to them from multiple directions, and understood that the underground world was alive in some way that they could not fully explain, responsive to their presence, communicating through the medium of its own geological body. Those painted animals, the horses and bison and mammoths and deer that move across the cave walls in the firelight, were painted by people who understood the underground in an immediate and physical way that modern cave visitors rarely achieve. They went deep into the earth with their small lights and their pigments and their songs, and they communicated with whatever they understood the underground to be, and they left their images in the dark to continue the communication after they were gone. And those images have been in the dark for 30,000 years, as patient as everything else underground, waiting in the silence for the next light to find them. There are underground lakes in cave systems around the world, lakes that sit in their stone chambers in perfect stillness, with water of extraordinary clarity, because there is no sediment stirring, no wind creating waves, no biological productivity clouding the water with algae or organic particles. The visibility in some underground lakes is measured not in meters but in tens of meters, sometimes in hundreds. The water so clear that the cave floor 40 or 50 feet below the surface is as plainly visible as the bottom of a glass of clean water. In some of these lakes, the reflections from the cave ceiling and the still water surface are so perfect that visitors have described not knowing which direction was up. The reflection of the cave ceiling and the water below indistinguishable from the real ceiling above, creating a sense of floating suspended in the middle of a complete stone world, equally surrounded above and below by the same dark, still, silent space. Diving in underground lakes is an experience that carries its own particular quality of peace and strangeness, very different from open water diving. The closed walls of the cave channel the light of a diver's torch in a different way than open water does. The stillness of the water is absolute in the absence of currents or wave action. The silence is the silence of stone, not merely the muffled quiet of the underwater world. And below the diver, in the lit circle of the torch beam, the cave floor stretches away in its pale limestone detail, and beyond the edge of the light there is only darkness, the same darkness that was in this cave before the first human ever thought to enter it, the same darkness that will be here long after the last human has gone, patient and absolute, and without any need for light at all. There is a cave in Vietnam called Son Doong, discovered by a local farmer in 1990 and first fully explored by scientists only in 2009, that is the largest known cave passage in the world by volume. Large enough in some of its chambers to contain a 40-story building, large enough to contain entire sections of jungle within itself, where collapse openings in the ceiling allow light to reach the floor and support plant growth, large enough to contain its own localized weather systems, with clouds forming inside the cave itself in the warm, moist air of the tropical cave environment. It has underground rivers and lakes and beaches of white sand within it. It has its own species of flora and fauna that exist nowhere else on Earth. And it lay unknown to the outside world, existing in its enormous quietness beneath the mountains of the Phong Na limestone karst. For millions of years, while civilizations rose and fell on the surface above it, until a local man stumbled upon the entrance and heard the wind coming out of the cave and smelled the moisture, and peered into the darkness and walked away without entering, because the darkness and the sound of the underground river echoing up from below seemed too large and too strange to approach alone. The wind that comes from large cave entrances, that sound of deep earth breathing, has been noted and recorded in human testimony from many parts of the world and many periods of history. It comes from the temperature differential between the cave interior, which maintains a constant temperature year-round, and the surface air, which changes with the seasons. In summer, when the surface is warm and the cave is cool, air flows inward from the surface, drawn in by the temperature gradient. In winter, when the surface is cold and the cave maintains its moderate interior temperature, the warmer cave air rises and flows outward through the entrance, a slow, steady exhalation of underground breath, cool and moist, and carrying the mineral scent of the deep interior. People in many cultures have interpreted this breathing cave phenomenon as evidence of a living presence within the earth, and, in a sense, they were not wrong. The cave is alive with its own thermodynamics, breathing with the seasons in a slow and patient respiratory rhythm that has been going on since the cave first opened to the surface millennia ago. There is a kind of resonance between the slow breathing of the earth, those seasonal exhalations from cave mouths and underground spaces, and the slow breathing of a body at rest, and it is possible to let those two rhythms come together in the awareness tonight, if you are willing to allow that kind of quiet imagination. The breath that moves into and out of your lungs right now is part of the same atmosphere that moves through cave entrances and underground passages all over the world. The same air that carries the scent of deep limestone and cool water and old stone up from the dark interior of the earth into the surface world. You are breathing a world that breathes. You are part of a planet whose interior is still alive with heat and chemistry and the slow movement of geological time. A planet whose surface is the thin skin of a much deeper world. A world that exists in patient darkness beneath every step you have ever taken, beneath every place you have ever been, beneath everything you have ever known. There is something in that thought that is not frightening, but rather settling, if you let it work its quiet way through your awareness tonight. The ground beneath you is not just support. It is depth. It is history. It is the accumulated patience of 4.5 billion years of geological time, layer upon layer upon layer of transformed and preserved experience, stretching downward from the soles of your feet, through the soil and the rock and the compressed sediment and the crystalline basement rock all the way to the mantle, and the outer core and the inner core. The solid iron heart of the earth spinning in its liquid iron surround, generating the magnetic field that wraps the whole planet in its protective embrace. You are not separate from this. You are resting on it. You are held by it. The same matter that makes up your body was once part of this geological system, was once dissolved in the ancient ocean or incorporated into ancient rock, or carried by ancient rivers through the underground world before making its way into the biological cycles that eventually produced the atoms that make up you. You are, in a sense, temporarily organized geology, temporarily organized stardust that fell to Earth billions of years ago and has been cycling through the geological and biological systems of this planet ever since, sometimes underground, sometimes on the surface, sometimes dissolved in ancient water, sometimes incorporated into living tissue, always part of the same vast and patient planetary story. And tonight, the temporarily organized geology is lying still in the dark, just as the crystals in the deep cave are lying still, just as the old bones in the Paris limestone are lying still, just as the ancient water in the deep aquifer is lying still, waiting in the patient dark for the long, slow processes of time to do what they will do. And there is great peace in that, if you can let yourself feel it, great rest in belonging to something that old and that patient and that vast. The roots beneath the forest floor are quiet tonight, their slow growth paused in the cool of the night, their mycorrhizal partnerships resting in the dark soil, the fungal networks moving their quiet chemistry through their web of threads. The cave formations are adding their imperceptible mineral increments to their patient structures, drip by slow drip in the dark. The cave fish are moving through their underground rivers in the absolute silence of the deep interior, navigating by the pressure waves their own movement creates, finding their way in the dark as they have always found their way, perfectly and without effort, in the world they know completely. The deep microbes are pursuing their 1,000-year metabolisms in the hot water between the deep rock grains, breathing hydrogen, exhaling nothing that the surface world would recognize, living their geological lives in the heat and pressure of the depths. All of this is happening right now, beneath the surface of the sleeping world, as quietly and as patiently as it has always happened. The underground does not know that it is night. The underground does not experience the transition from day to night or from waking to sleeping that the surface world experiences with every rotation of the earth. Down in the dark, there is only the constant, patient, unhurried movement of matter through time, the long geological processes doing their slow and essential work, the living things doing what living things underground have always done, which is to persist, quietly and completely, in the world they have been given. Let all of that quiet settle around you now, if you are willing. Let the idea of all those deep and patient worlds beneath you become a kind of weight, a gentle, comfortable, geological weight that presses you softly into the surface you are resting on, the way that the weight of all that rock above presses softly on the things that live in caves and tunnels and underground lakes. A pressure that is not uncomfortable but simply present, simply real, simply the feeling of being in the world and of the world, held by gravity and by stone, and by the patient mathematics of a very old and very stable planet. There is nothing that needs to happen now. There is nothing that needs to be remembered or understood or held on to. The crystals will grow in the dark whether or not you are awake to think about them. The underground rivers will continue their quiet flows through the limestone passages. The fungi will continue their patient chemical work in the soil. The cave fish will continue their sightless navigation in the cold water of the deep interior. The earth will continue its slow geological processes in the dark beneath all of us, patient beyond any patience you have ever needed to exercise, steady beyond any steadiness you have ever needed to achieve. You are resting on something very old and very reliable tonight. The ground beneath you has been here for billions of years, and it will be here long after everything that occupies you today has been dissolved and transformed and recycled into the great geological story of the planet. The deepest rock beneath you has endured temperatures and pressures that would seem extreme and impossible to a surface creature, and it has endured them quietly, without complaint, and it remains. It simply remains, solid and patient and profoundly, immovably present. Let yourself be held by that tonight, if the thought is comforting. Let the idea of all that depth beneath you, all those layers of ancient time and patient matter, be a kind of foundation for rest, a geological cushion of enormous depth and age, supporting you in the same quiet way that it supports everything that rests upon it. Your breathing is slowing, perhaps, if it has not already slowed, settling into the deeper, quieter rhythm of rest, the rhythm that belongs to the body when the day is over and the demands of waking attention are beginning to release their hold on the mind. Let that slowing happen without any effort. Let the breath move on its own, in and out, at whatever pace it wishes, without any direction or intention from you. It knows what to do. Your body has been breathing without your direction for your entire life, through every moment of sleep, through every moment of distraction and dream, and it will continue to do so tonight without any help from you. The underground world is very quiet. The crystals are growing in their caves without any sound at all, without even the faintest vibration reaching the ears of anything that might be there to hear it. The fungal threads are moving through the soil without any pressure that even the smallest creature would feel. The deep water is moving through the aquifer rock with the gentleness of something that has moved through the same rock for 10,000 years, and will move through it for 10,000 more, unhurried, untroubled, simply flowing downhill through the porous stone in the patient way of water. Deep in the limestone of some ancient seabed, now solid rock buried far beneath the surface, there are the fossils of creatures that lived in a warm, shallow sea hundreds of millions of years ago. Creatures that had no bones but left impressions in the sediment that hardened around them over geological time, impressions of shells and the soft bodies of creatures without names, preserved in the dark and the rock that their living world became, as quiet now as anything that has ever existed in the underground, as still as the rock that holds them, as patient as the earth itself. They were once alive in the light and the warmth of an ancient sea, and now they rest in the dark and the stone, transformed by time into something permanent and mineral and utterly quiet. And perhaps it is possible to imagine tonight that there is something in that transformation that is peaceful rather than sad. Something in the idea of being held permanently and gently by the stone, of being part of the geological record, of resting in the deep dark in a stillness that will never be disturbed by weather or season or the noise of the surface world, that feels something like the deepest and most complete rest of all. You do not need to hold any of this in mind. You do not need to remember the cave formations or the underground rivers or the mycelial networks or the deep microbes or the ancient water or the buried fossils. These thoughts have simply been here, moving through your awareness like the gentle current in an underground river, flowing past without requiring anything of you, offering their quiet company without any demand that you pay attention or understand or retain. If any particular image has stayed with you, the soft glow of cave ceiling in an underground lake, the patient dripping of mineral water building a stalactite in the dark, the quiet density of soil alive with its invisible millions, the still air of a deep cave chamber, let it rest lightly in your awareness, or let it drift away entirely, whichever feels most natural, whichever leads most easily toward the place where thought dissolves into the soft warmth of sleep. The night is very deep. The underground world is very quiet. Everything that moves underground moves slowly, with a patience that the surface world rarely achieves and never needs to hurry. The rock is patient. The water is patient. The darkness is patient. And you, lying still in the quiet of wherever you are resting tonight, are resting in a place that is supported from below by all of that patience, all of that depth, all of that accumulated geological time, the billions of years of slow transformation and quiet endurance that built the ground beneath you, and will maintain it long after this particular night has become part of the past. Let the weight of all that time settle around you now. Let it hold you. Let the heaviness of deep stone and deep time move through your limbs and your back and your shoulders, a comfortable, gentle, geological heaviness that belongs to something very old and very settled. Let your mind become as quiet as a deep cave, as still as underground water in a dark chamber, as patient as a crystal growing in the permanent dark. There is nothing left to do tonight. The underground world will continue its patient work in the dark beneath you, as it always has, as it always will. The roots will continue their slow downward reach. The fungi will continue their quiet chemistry. The cave systems will hold their formations in the dark. The deep water will continue its slow flow through the ancient rock. All of it will continue quietly and completely, without needing anything from you. You have nothing left to do but rest. You are allowed to let go of everything now, the thoughts and the concerns and the half-finished plans and the memories of today. Let them dissolve into the soft darkness, the way that surface sounds dissolve when you pass beneath the entrance of a very deep cave, fading and softening, and finally becoming nothing more than a distant memory of noise, and then nothing, and then only the quiet of the underground, which is the deepest quiet there is, older than any silence the surface world has ever known. Rest now, and let the deep earth hold you, patient and steady and immovably kind, in the long dark of this quiet night.